This is Dr. Thomas Klein coming to you from Raleigh, North Carolina. My special interest right now are the number of people in the United States with rare painful diseases that have been purposely taken off their pain medicine at the urging of the CDC, backed up by the Federal Drug Police. The Federal Drug Police in February 2018 issued a statement that made it clear they were holding to the CDC guidelines. This is an unusual thing. Police departments usually do not become involved with medical policy, and that's what the CDC guideline was. Also, the consultants to the CDC, the Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing, or PROP, petitioned the FDA in 2012 to try to reduce the use of opiate pain medicines, which was roundly denied by the FDA. But interestingly, the Federal Drug Police filed a kind of amicus brief with the FDA saying they agreed with the PROP proposal to limit the use of opiate drugs. Police departments don't normally do this. So we have a country with a federal drug police. No other country in the world has a federal drug police. This was done by Richard Nixon, who he and John Mitchell, his attorney general, wrote a horrible law, which is commonly called the CSA, or Controlled Substance Act. Actually, it was called the Control of Abuse and Control of Opiate Pain Medicines, a broader title. John Mitchell went to federal prison because he believed that government officials didn't have to follow the law. Well, that didn't sit too well with the federal judge, and he went to prison. But John Mitchell followed the paranoia of Richard Nixon, the president that he worked for, and wrote the law in such a way that it is basically set to catch Richard Nixon's political opponents. How do we know that? John Ehrlichman confessed that 20 years later, the right-hand man for Richard Nixon. So we have set up a federal drug police called the DEA. DEA is the Drug Enforcement Agency. It's part of the Department of Justice, the prosecutors. That in itself is strange, because if any of you have watched Law and Order, it starts off by saying there are two units in government. One, law enforcement, the DEA, and two, the prosecutors. They are usually separate. But the way John Mitchell wrote the law, the DEA is part of the prosecutors. That in itself is a serious issue that needs to be looked at by Congress. But there's another issue. The DEA was given both regulatory and enforcement functions. This is not done, period. For example, regulatory function for McDonald's would be kitchen inspectors. And they have rules, and they come in and they make sure the kitchen is clean and everything is healthy and the refrigerator's in the proper temperature. And they can issue fines, and if it's really bad, they can pull the license. Now, if they've criminally violated the law, then you have to call in the police department and say, look, we got to arrest these people based on this law. Now you're dealing with a law. Now you're not dealing with regulation on keeping clean kitchens. So the federal drug police are regulatory. That means that they can go to doctors' offices and pharmacies and snoop around in the files and kind of scare people, which they do, and try to say that, you doctor or you pharmacist are not following the rules. And so normally, like McDonald's, you would submit a correction plan. They would make a list of things on their clipboard, and you would, like in 30 days, come back with a plan. But because of a glitch in the law, and it's probably the same for McDonald's inspectors, if it is found to be imminent danger, then they can shut the restaurant down. Now, you gotta have a lot of evidence to shut a restaurant down. And you gotta have a lot of evidence to shut down a doctor's practice. But it happened. As reported in Vice News last November 30th, Vice News, a DEA agent came to a prominent doctor's office in the Los Angeles area, Dr. Bockoff, Bockoff, and they came in on their regulatory function, snooped through his files, looked through his records, looked through the medical records, and they pulled his DEA license. Now, in this country, and only this country, you have to have 2 licenses in order to treat people in pain. You have to have a medical license from the state, and you have to have a federal license, which we pay about $500 a year for, from the DEA, which there's no value in having it. The money goes to supporting the DEA. That comes and takes our licenses. So without warning, they go into this older solo physician's office, which is the MO. I'm older, and it happened to me. And the word was that, well, you know, he's in his twilight years. He's probably out there just handing out stuff. So the DEA believes that it's their God's given role to save the population from the horrors of addiction by controlling the number of pills. So if a doctor is prescribing a lot of pills, over prescribing, these people have to go. Now, you can't arrest them because you're doing regulatory stuff. They haven't broken any law, even though you can make it up later, which we're going to discuss in other videos, which we're going to do every Monday. But they took his license. Now, that means he can no longer, as the moment they take his license, he can no longer prescribe pain medications for his patients. If this was in Canada, there wouldn't have been a problem. There's no DEA police. There's no separate registration in order to prescribe controlled substances. This is all Richard Nixon. And I'll tell you something, Richard Nixon was a brilliant global strategist and statesman. He ended the Vietnam War. He started friendly relations with China. But he was so paranoid, he believed that hippies who smoked marijuana and black folks who used cocaine were his enemies. And this is how you take them out. You arrest them based on the possession of these drugs. Because in this country, you cannot arrest people based on their political beliefs. So anyway, Dr. Bockoff had a patient by the name of Danny Elliott who was on our Twitter feed because he was a long-term painful disease patient maintained on long-term pain medicines, and he needed them, and he tried alternate pain medicines, he tried everything, and then he finally found some doctors, but then the doctors start getting shut down by the DEA. So he would have to find new doctors, and I can tell you in this country right now, you try to find a doctor that'll treat your pain, forget it. So each transition meant weeks or months of desperate scrambling to find a replacement. Why are pain patients desperate? Because the drug works. Think of the last time you had severe pain and picture it being gone. Then picture it coming back and staying back because nobody's going to give you any medicines. So the DEA visited Dr. Bockoff on November the 1st, and Elliott, his first name is Danny Elliott, who we kind of all knew, tweeted, "Even though I knew this would happen at some point, I'm stunned. Now I can't get any pain relief as a chronic pain patient, so I'm officially done with the U.S. healthcare system. His wife, Gretchen, who was 60, he was about 60, frantically tried to find another doctor. They went to court and asked for an injunction against the DEA. Now remember, the DEA's pulled this guy's license on regulatory function, which means they can do it any way they want. They don't have to prove laws. It's strictly up to the police department as set up by Richard Nixon. So they tried for a week, and his brother, Jim, got an email from him, and it sounded like he was going to kill himself, Danny. And they called the police, and the police went over there at 8 a.m., and both Danny and his wife were dead from suicide. Good evening.